In this video, we're going to look at what CSS is, where we can use it, and also what the syntax looks like. We're also going to take this not very nicely looking web page and turn it into something that looks a bit nicer. Hey, how's it going guys? Welcome back to J&J, GeoDev. I'm Giros, and today we'll be diving into CSS, so let's go ahead and get started. CSS is a styling language, and it basically stands for Cascading Style Sheets. The main purpose of CSS is to change the way content is being represented and displayed, so websites and applications can look a bit nicer. CSS is used together with HTML to style content on the web, which makes websites look pretty nice. The syntax of CSS is fairly straightforward. We basically have a selector that can target any HTML element, and it could be a tag name, a class name, an ID, or even a HTML attribute. The selector is then followed by a pair of curly braces, and inside of these braces we write our CSS styles that we want to apply to the HTML element we are targeting. These styles consist of a property value pair, and with that we have officially finished constructing our selector. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into an IDE or a text editor of choice and begin writing some CSS. I already have some basic markup laid out for our web page, and in case you're wondering how to build your first web page, we already have a video on that topic which we'll make sure to link up in the info card. To get started, we first need to create a CSS file, just like this, and generally speaking, a name of styles is pretty common, but you can name it anything you like. Just make sure to give it the .css file extension at the end of it to indicate that we are creating a CSS file. Next up, we'll need to link our CSS file to our HTML file by adding the link tag inside the head section of our HTML document. And here we can specify the relation between our CSS file and the HTML file, and we also specify the source or the location of the CSS file we want to link, which in this case is just styles.css, as it is located in the same directory or folder as our HTML file. So before we begin styling our web page, I want to quickly assign some class names and IDs to some of the HTML elements so we can reference them later on in the CSS and apply specific styles only to those elements. So now that we have linked our CSS and HTML files together, we can start styling our web page. So firstly, let's do something about this very bright color that the web page has by default. For this purpose, we can target the body tag, so any styles will be applied to the body tag of our HTML document. So next up, let's add the pair of curly braces, and inside of them we can use the background color property with a darker color value of #333. But if we make the background color a bit darker, that's gonna make it very difficult to see the text on top of it. So for this purpose, let's add another property, color, and give it a value of #FFF, which is white. And the color property essentially affects the color of any piece of typography that is nested inside of our body tag. So let's break this down a bit. Notice the property name consists of two words that are separated by a hyphen or a dash, and the value we give to it is a color represented in a hex value. So if we save, we can see the changes taking place and our styles being applied onto our web page, which is exactly what we wanted. A Visual Studio Code even nicely displays what the color would look like right next to the specified value. And one side note here, we can apply these styles to the generic HTML tag, and the result would be the same. In case you were curious if the body tag had some magical abilities, it really doesn't. Next up, I'd like to change the font style of our web page, and by default it uses a very basic serif font, which looks really ugly in my opinion. So for this purpose, I'm going to jump over to Google Fonts real quick and select a nicer looking font. So once selected, we can go over here and choose the import option to directly include it into our CSS file. So to use it in CSS, we can directly import it using the import rule, which essentially allows us to import an external resource. Could be a local file or an URL from the web. And in this case, it is an URL that points to Google Fonts, which contains the font style we have selected. By importing it directly into our CSS file, we are making it accessible to any style we write in this CSS file. To implement the font style we imported, we can use the font family property on our body element and give it two values. The first one is the font family that we want to apply if it is available, and the second option is a generic font family that will be applied in case our first font fails to load and doesn't get applied. So moving on, the way our content is hugging the left hand side of the web page doesn't look particularly nice, so let's give it some breathing room. So for this purpose, we are going to select our main heading using the H1 selector. We are also going to select the subheading and the paragraph at the bottom of our web page using the subheading and the more info class selectors respectively. We can then use the margin left property, which essentially allows us to push the selected elements away from the left hand side, and we can also give it a value of 2 rem, which is basically 32 pixels. And next up, we can increase the size of our main heading by once again selecting the H1 element and using the font size property to increase it in size. We can give it a value of 4 rem, which is the equivalent of 64 pixels. And for those of you wondering, the rem unit essentially looks at the default font size of our document, and by default it is 16 pixels. So therefore 1 rem unit is the same as 16 pixels. We can then go ahead and also increase the size of our subheading and the two list headings by using the class selectors subheading and list heading, and apply the font size property to both of them with values of 1.5 rem or 24 pixels and also 2.5 rem or 40 pixels. And by default, the HTML heading elements from H1 to H6 have some margin around them, which essentially gives them some space from the elements surrounding them. And here we can get rid of that margin on the two list headings by using the margin property and giving it a value of 0, which means that there won't be any space between them and any elements around them. So next up, let's select our two lists by using the ID selectors of IDE list and text editor list. And let's give them a background color with a value of 444, which is a lighter gray color. But if we save, you might notice that our lists span across the whole screen. So this is because by default, most HTML elements are something called block level elements, which essentially means that they will always start on a new line and will take up all the width available to them. But in this case, we don't want our list spanning across the whole screen, so a way to fix that would be by giving them the width property and setting it to a value of fit content. What this does is it essentially tells our HTML elements to only take up as much width as they need to fit their content. And if we save, we can see that now our lists only take up as much space as they need, which is exactly what we wanted. We can also add some space around the content nested inside of these two lists by using the padding property and giving it a value of 3 rem or 48 pixels. So what this does is it basically adds some space around the children elements that are nested inside. So if we save, we can see that there is more space around the list headings and the list items nested within the actual lists. So next up, we can add some styles to our list items by targeting the LI element and giving them some space at the top by using the margin top property and setting it a value of 1 rem. And this essentially pushes our list items down a bit as it adds some space on top of them. We can also give them some space on the left by using the margin left property with a value of 1.5 rem, so it makes everything nicely lined up vertically. And lastly, we can also increase the size of our list items by increasing their font size, just like this. To finish off, let's style the paragraph at the bottom of our web page together with the anchor element nested inside of it. So for this purpose, we can target the more info class and increase the font size. We can also set a max width to our paragraph so it doesn't stretch across the whole screen by using the max width property and giving it a value of 70 ch. The ch unit essentially stands for a character and it represents the size of the character 0. So 70 ch would be the same width as if you put 70 zeros one after another in a single line. Now let's style our anchor element, so we can target it by using the ID selector of article link. And let's change the color of it to white. Now we can also achieve this by, instead of explicitly giving it the value of white, we can give it the value of inherit, which would essentially look at the parent element. In this case it is the paragraph element, and check for its color value. So the color value of our paragraph is white. So our anchor element, which is a child of this paragraph, would inherit this white value, so it would become white too. Next up, we can also remove this underline that the anchor element has by default by using the text decoration property, which would allow us to add some decoration to our element or completely remove it. So in this case, I will keep it the way it is and won't add any other decoration to it. So finally, let's make it so that the anchor element changes color whenever we hover our mouse over it. So for this purpose, we can use the pseudo class of hover, which is essentially like an event, and the styles given to the pseudo class will only apply whenever this event triggers, or in other words, whenever we hover our mouse over it. So let's save and try it. And as you can see, the anchor element changes color to red whenever we hover our mouse over it, which is exactly what we wanted. And that's pretty much what CSS is and how we can use it to make our HTML look a bit nicer. If you guys enjoyed the video and found it useful, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. And thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.